Welcome to Legends of News, the podcast that chats with the biggest and best names of journalism over the last decades, gleaning revelations and insights from people who've, to put it mildly, have seen a thing or two. My guest today is one of the most experienced foreign correspondents around. Now, more of an author and analyst, I'd say. He can correct me on that if he likes. He has reported from all of the world's major trouble spots. His books are particularly pertinent for these troubled times we're living in deepening our understanding of the retreat from globalization and the increasing assertion of borders and national identity. And I would say, given his knowledge of geography, you'd certainly want him on your pub quiz team for the Identify the Flags round. Tricky, that, isn't it? Please welcome Tim Marshall. Hi there, Tim.
Hello, Dermot. A, your check's in the post. And B, I was rubbish at geography at school. The teachers said I had bad latitude. But if I could just, set the tone for the...
but are you, just looking at what's going on behind you, and we'll talk about the books, were you one of those kids? Because we do, we want to know the genesis of Tim Marshall and his interest in journalism. Were you one of those kids who, had those books, as they then were, of flags of the world and capitals of the world, and do you know them all?
Genesis. Well, in the beginning, I knew very little. Seriously, how to put it? I was invited to leave school when I was 16. I put it because I was not expelled. I was invited to leave, and my reading was Skinhead Escapes, Sven Hassel's Wheels of Terror, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, great book.
But that said, I was always fascinated with the world, and I did like maps, and I was struck by various things. I remember at the age of 12 seeing some footage from Auschwitz and just being, shocked and wanting to know more. And I had probably read things like Orwell's 1984, but I was not scholarly. I left to become a painter and decorator, and it was later on. Sorry, I will jump forward and to get to how I got interested in the world. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's punk rock and new wave.
Oh, crikey! Tell us how and why. What a route! This is so fascinating, Tim. Well, it's better than the went to Cambridge and got on the BBC training scheme and whatever. Go on, tell us.
Well, if you're listening to a Clash album that says that, and the title is Sandinista. Yeah. The music's really cool. You think Sandinista, so you go and find out a wee bit about it. And in the Clash, in that particular album, I think there's an album. Even if it's not on that, it's not the point. There's a Clash song, Spanish Bombs, Spanish Civil War, and that then would then lead you to Orwell, and perhaps his experiences there. Or there's so many other groups that had, especially in the punk new wave, that had politics in the genre that then just opened up a whole horizon to me, got me much more interested than I was, and satiated part of that thirst for knowledge.
What were you in a band yourself, or were you just a consumer?
I hesitate to say I was in a band. We did form a band. I was the drummer. It never got past rehearsals.
You never got on stage. You never got a paying public.
No. I think I wouldn't have been very good.
Okay, so how do you then follow up that interest? It's interesting that you were so interested. You're a painter and decorator. You're into punk. You're wondering, Sandinista, what's going on in Nicaragua. How did you explore that?
I was into soul music as well, and actually that seriously got me into understanding more about the racial divides in America, and John Luther King and all that sort of thing. So there I was. I after being a painter and decorator, I joined the Air Force. Did 4 years in the RAF. Bought myself out. because during that 4-year period, I was really exploring more and more and reading more and more.
Did you travel? Were you posted overseas with the RAF?
Yeah, I did 2 years at RAF Germany in Rheindal, and I used to go and see Borussia Mönchengladbach play football. There, that's another lifelong.
We're going to get on to that, Tim. Don't worry.
Well, also, because you've pointed this out, you've brought this up. Let me say something else going back to teenage years. We used to go home and away, Leeds United, and on the coach, to Ipswich, it's like 5 hours. I was with kids that could recite. They knew all 92 league clubs. They knew the nicknames of all 92. They knew the ground, every single stadium. Yeah, I mean, it's anorak for football fans. Yeah. But the point I'm making about that is if you have that level of passion and interest in something, it just proves that even though, we were all the kids that left school at 16, most of them have got that capacity to learn if you've got a subject matter you're interested in and somebody teaches it to you properly. So, there's an awful lot of smart kids about. And so I just sort of applied that sort of thing to international relations eventually. Sorry. So there I am in the Air Force, by myself out, got myself into college, actually, as a mature student. And in those days, of course, it was paid for. Went to the States for a year as part of that. And then I hit really lucky. I didn't have a job. I was working for a charity driving underprivileged kids around to, go to the zoo or whatever. And I was doing a night school course. And in those days, Red Ken was providing free night school.
Glad to say, yeah. Ken Livingstone now, what then leading the GLC in London, yeah.
The under 70s. Ken Livingstone was in charge, GLC, all that. And I was doing a French conversation course. And at that course was the news desk assistant secretary of LBC IRN. Told her that I'd always wanted to be a journalist when I was a kid, but I didn't even know what a CV was, never mind how to spell it. And bless her, she said, look, type up a CV. What? And she handed it to a woman called Vivian Fowle, who was ran the sort of research department at LBC, and she needed someone for 3 days. Basically, news inf, as it was called. If a reporter was rushing out onto a job, let's say some politician's just been arrested for something, they would rush up to news inf, go through all the files, pull out all the background on the MP, and then repeat all the mistakes that were already in that. And I did 3 days, and 40 years later, here I am.
Well, Vivian, who I know as well, I mean, she does wonderful work for charity now, and she's going to feature. She's going to feature with one of my guests soon to come. Yeah,
a poster, which is worth retelling, but we'll come to it. Sorry, I'm so happy, Viv. I did a talk for her charity recently, and she is as formidable as she ever was.
Yeah, I mean, she's fantastic, and as I say, she's going to feature. I'm going to have a chat with Martha Carney. Did you cross paths with her at LBC? I mean, it really was a proving ground, wasn't it? LBC in the early 80s, yeah.
And Brown, I think. The list is long, but I mean, Martha was like up there in the gods because she was a reporter, and my nickname at the time was the Cappuccino Kid.
Cappuccino, you're very posh then, even in London.
Oh, yes. No, because I used to go out and get the bacon sandwich in the morning.
I see, yeah. But I mean, just in terms of the background, Leeds United, you're from Leeds, you're from Yorkshire, and proud of that. We know, as I say, we'll get on to that. So how did you then? Was Vivian? I was going to ask you this. Was Vivian the teacher? You said you needed the desire to get the knowledge, but you needed someone to give it to you, or had you already done that by going to college?
Well, a bit of both. I wouldn't say. I mean, Vivian's many positive things. She wasn't the teacher. No, I just got my head down and got stuck in, and just did all the things that you were required to do. And she, managed the department very well. And at the same time, I started at 9 with Viv, but I'd usually been in since 5:30 because I used to do the train cancellations. And I'll tell you how. I mean, this should get the Pulitzer. But the first time I typed out something like the 6:05 from Guildford to Waterloo, we was running half an hour late, and it was read out, and I thought, I wrote that. I'm not joking.
I know. It's that first. Yeah, I mean, I started on a local paper. The first time, you get a front page lead. It may only be a nib, but it's there somewhere, on the front page. You go, oh, yeah.
Martha
the cat with 10 lives.
They were the stars, and I was this junior. But like I said, I did that shift, then that shift, and I started volunteering on Saturdays, and eventually I got covering football matches at Leighton Orient and whatever. It was great. It was great.
I mean, that's real. A lot of people listen to this who want to get into journalism. So that's, really good background. I know that's, 40 odd years ago, but it's still in different forms, in different kind of versions of the medium. That applies because it's what you're prepared to do to get there rather than how you do it.
Sadly, I think there's less roots in like that now. I mean, I really do think it is a good degree from a good university followed by, a year's in a journalist training. But I do hope there are newsrooms still willing to just open the door for people that haven't gone down that route, because then their newsroom would better reflect the country to which they're reporting. But you're absolutely right about the work ethic. Gave a talk at school in Tottenham a couple of weeks ago. Fantastic kids. Tottenham School of Excellence. It's right next to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Fantastic school. The kids were such a credit to it. But there was this slight air of, what? When I said, if someone says work weekends, work the weekend. If someone says there's a night shift, work the night shift. Because that will mark you out as the one who's got the drive. You're prepared to go through the wall to get, and that's just last night. I was with some captain of industry, and I asked them, in a big city figure, I asked him, are the graduates coming through, what they like? And he said that what marks out the ones that I think they're going to go places, they're the ones that solve problems that I give them, who don't say, oh, well, there's no getting around hard work.
And you did the hard work. You mentioned there that you'd learned French. That was that turned out to be very significant, didn't it, in terms of your career and what LBC did with you?
Well, it's also another example of what a chancer I am. So after a couple of years at LBC, they had this thing. They never had a Paris correspondent, even freelance. And I remember the editor saying to me, every few months someone goes off and they disappear down the metro. We never hear from them again. I said, oh, I'll go to Paris. I've read Hemingway, The Movable Feast. And so I said, look, seriously, I would love to go and move to Paris. I know you can't give me a staff job, but if you call me a Paris correspondent, I'll start filing. And they said, do you speak French? And I said, do you think it was so stupid as to go to Paris if I didn't speak French? Which, of course, wasn't a lie. It was a statement. But I barely got past bonjour. And I remember this is pre-internet, pre-mobile phones. I remember they always used to wonder why they could never get hold of me in my flat in the mornings. And that's because I was on an intensive learning French course every morning. The news had to wait till the afternoon so I could translate.
I see. Get the job first, then get up to speed. Yeah, exactly. But that's a foot in the door technique, isn't it? That's another way you get the jobs. Then you move very rapidly to where we cross paths very happily for many years at Sky News. Were you a founder member of Sky? It started in '89, didn't it? Were you about then?
I was living in Paris at the time, and this was like 3 years I'd done, and was happily the voice of LBC in Paris, and Sky launched, and I filed a story that first week, I remember, because there were several people that had jumped from LBC to help launch it. So in a way, I'm kind of a founder member. And then after about a year, they said, come back and we'll give you a reporter's job. Thought about it, yeah, okay. And two quick things on that. When I got back, suddenly the B Sky merger or competition was happening, and Murdoch bet the farm on Sky, and if it hadn't worked, the whole empire was going to collapse, and so they put a freeze on recruitment. And I remember saying to the then head of youth, but not me, because you asked me to come back and I've just moved country. And he said, well, terrific. And so I was freelancing for another year. But the other thing was, the last story I covered in Paris was the Cambodian peace talks. And that's, the sort of stuff, because I'm a nerd, I'd always kind of wanted to do. And then I go back and I am the junior of the juniors. And so it was cats up trees again, which is good. It's a good learning curve. But they very quickly realized that all the best stuff I was voicing up was the foreign stuff.
So where were you? I mean, we mentioned 89 Foundation of Sky, but hugely important in terms of what we are going to get into more deeply. Well, let's start now. Borders, 89, Berlin Wall comes down. And also, actually, this is a story. I wonder if you cover that, because it was one of my first big stories. I mean, well forgotten now. Not the Berlin Wall. No. I'm going to stay in Paris. Were you there, Paris, France? It was the Paris, France. Am I American? It was the bicentenaire, if I can pronounce that correctly. Please accept my pronunciation. 1789, 1989. Yep. Do you remember that parade through Paris? I was there covering it. It was the most bonkers thing I've ever seen. But it summed up, that French national pride, which is very different from here in the UK. I mean, huge here, huge there, but wow. I mean, are they full of themselves? Given us a lot of people say, hey, we bailed you out twice last century, come on.
It almost went on for a whole year, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember that parade. I was there, and it was an amazing year. And again, it really reinforced to me that this how deep this idea of liberty, equality, and fraternity is supposed to go in France. And, the fact they have a military parade, I mean, we just don't do that stuff. And we do beating, retreat, and trooping the colour, but it's very, very different. We don't drive bloody missiles and tanks down the mall. They drive them down the Champs-Élysées. Yeah, I learned a lot. And here's one of the things about being a foreign correspondent. I think you learn a lot about your own country by going to other countries.
Yeah, looking at it from their perspective. I mean, because you've got a foot in both camps?
Well, yeah, because you realize that they do things this way and we don't. And it makes you think about, we don't do this. Why don't we do this? Or we do this. And it just helps you when you realize there are different ways of organizing society. And then you look at how we've organized society. It just helps you to better understand. But you're talking about, the Berlin Wall. I was too junior. I would have loved to have done it. 91, then the Bosnia War breaks out, and I was, I'll go. And I think correctly, some of the wiser heads, they're not going to send this junior who doesn't know anything. And it was a couple of years into it before they sort of let me go to places like Belgrade to do the politics of the Bosnian and Croatian and wars. And that was what really, I think, set me on a path. And I ended up in Bosnia and covering, mostly on the Serb side and being in Sarajevo briefly and things like that. And so by then I'm approaching 30 or something. And I do think you do need to have a bit of experience under your belt before you run off to places like that.
Definitely. Were you in danger ever, do you think?
Sometimes. Much more later on, not so much there.
Mm-hmm. In terms of your deepening understanding then of relationships between countries and the breakup of countries in the case of the Balkans, the ethnic tensions still there now. I mean, never going to dissipate. They were kind of glossed over, weren't they, under the Tito regime for so many years, and then all the poisons have burst out.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Yugoslav friends who my brilliant producer Yaksha, who used to say, Yugoslavia, it was a good idea. And he wanted it to remain. What it taught me fairly early on was the depths of passion that ethnicity and this was key, religion plays. Because I would have bet that nationalism beats any card you've got. And then I realized, actually, I think religious, when you add, I think that beats nationalism. as a trump card of passion and what you're prepared to do for it. Religion beats nationalism, and when you mix them all together, it gets even worse.
So is that part of the autocrat's craft then, to marry the two together, and then they've got a really potent hold on a population?
Yeah. If you've got a place like Bosnia with 3 different ethnicities and at least 2 different religions, if you've got people of ill will who know their history and their religion, they know how to press the buttons, the emotional buttons of each side, and remind them of past problems in order to drag them away from each other and then push them onto each other to achieve their aims. And that's what I learned from Bosnia, that, most Bosnians would have been carried on, and they could even have found a way to settle their differences. But if you've got people of ill will preparing to pull them apart, it takes quite a lot to stop them.
Then into the early 2000s, end of the 90s, we have again with the Balkans, Kosovo, the NATO intervention.
You did Kosovo.
Yeah, I was in Pristina when the Serbs withdrew and NATO came in. Yeah, I mean,
that was my breakthrough. I was busy, being established as one of the reporters that gets the foreign gigs, which is what I wanted. And then I spent the 3 months of the Kosovo War in Belgrade and in Kosovo. And it was just me and John Simpson that stayed behind. Everybody else was either expelled or left. Well, we were expelled. We just said, nah. And I was in Pristina you were coming up with the NATO troops. I'd come down from Belgrade, and that was really sort of kicked you up a gear. But then, you've mentioned the 2000s. Then comes 2001, 9/11, and then that was it. It was just a sprint. And I used to say to some of my younger colleagues, guys, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But we just sprinted for like 15 years. It was exhausting.
Absolutely. But I mean, the list, if it has to be a list, is just incredible. You're looking back at it from where you are now, Tim.
Yeah, and it was normal. It's weird. Yeah. Off to Afghanistan for a couple of months, up with the Northern Alliance. A few months later, you're in Kabul. A year later, a couple of years later, when the Brits are then going in, you're down in Helmand province. In between that, you're in Baghdad in the run-up to it. And then shortly after the statue fell, I was back in there and doing all that stuff. And then on you go to, I don't even know the sequence, but Libya, 2011, 2012, back to Afghanistan with the Marines and one Scots, onto Egypt and the fall of Mubarak. Where else? Well, Yemen, that was fascinating. And then finally Syria, and several trips to Syria. And you talked about danger earlier. That's when it got really, really sticky. And our great dear colleague and friend Mickey Dean had been killed murdered by, I think, an Egyptian army sniper in Cairo. And Mickey's death, plus some reasonably close calls in Syria, and to be honest with you, exhaustion, including possibly emotional exhaustion. I was thinking I was getting compassion fatigue, and I'm thinking, not sure how much longer I can do this.
Absolutely. I mean, you're very frank about the mental toll. I remember at the time, when you said we chatted, and you said, it's getting too much. I mean, is it worth labeling it? I mean, have you had counselling? Is it PTSD? Was it PTSD or anything?
No, I don't think it's PTSD with me, and I think it is with people. I think some other people, and I wouldn't name names, I think some correspondents are addicted to the adrenaline rush. They can't give it up, and I think that's dangerous both to themselves and their colleagues. I think there's an ego thing, because, it is, in our world, it was one of the glamour stuff. I mean, there should be nothing glamorous about war. But, it's the glamour postings, the guys and women that go out and do that stuff. And I think there's an ego thing that if I don't do that, what am I? And people are reluctant to let go. of it. But no, I don't think PTSD. I just think you can divorce yourself from it, and I think you have to, because otherwise, you're going to wander around reporting crying all the time. Wouldn't do to have everybody weeping into the lens, would it? So I just thought, well, hang on, if you're having compassion fatigue, it's time to stop doing this. Okay, and Sky were great, by the way. They were brilliant. Offered me various positions, managed it all. I was still daft enough to go off to a couple more dodgy places afterwards, but Sky were great. I have no hard feelings about when we parted ways on very amicable terms.
What were the good bits about that life on the road in the trouble spots? The camaraderie, obviously, and the access to these incredible, formative, seismic world events.
That's it. I mean, you've hit it, Derm. I mean, you've been on the road with the crews, and then if you're with a good crew and everyone's prepared to muck in and work hard, and you talk about, are we going to go down that road or not? And, everybody has a veto, because again, there's one or two correspondents who, we are going down that road, even if you don't want to. I mean, I just so hate that attitude. I learned this from the Serb guys I worked with in Kosovo. You got a bad feeling? We're not going there. I mean, the week before Mickey died, we were together in that square in Cairo, and it was getting pretty hairy, and there was some gunshots going off, and Mick just said to me, "We've got enough?" And I said, "We've got enough." And off we went. Sorry, I'll try and get back to the point. Sorry, what was the question?
Good bits. Positive bits. Good. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing good about a trouble spot, but the
jokes, the laughs, the bants, but yeah, and also that realization that you're seeing history. I mean, it's the old cliche, the first draft of history, and obviously sometimes it's not entirely accurate, but you're trying to do your best. And there's one particular example, Dermot. We were down in Karbala 3 or 4, maybe 5 days after the statue had come down in Baghdad, and it was the end of the regime. Now, Saddam was a Sunni who co-opted some Sunnis, co-opted some Christians, but basically ruled by elevating the Sunni class and suppressing the Shia, notably when he killed so many of them when they had to flee up, and the Kurds. And they weren't allowed to worship properly. The Shia in Islam, Sunnis do not beat their chests. Shia beat their chests. They're feeling the pain of Ali, their martyr Ali. And they weren't allowed to worship. Like they could go to the mosque, they could pray, but there was certain things they couldn't do. Now, we went down to Karbala, and this was the first time in 25 years they could do this openly, and more than 1 million people showed up in this city of Karbala, the holy city. And I looked at that, and I remember writing, it's no such a big line, but I just remember writing, the Shia are back on the world stage. And what I meant by that was that I knew enough about the borders and the history and the religion that the Iranians were not going to let this go, because the Iranians are Shia, most of them. And I just looked at that and realized that what I was seeing was not just 1 million people free to practice their religion the way they wanted to. I was looking at Iran, seeing this and thinking, how can we surge this and push right out across the Middle East? I knew in that moment. And that's a privilege to see that sort of stuff. Same as if to those reporters that were in Berlin as the wall was coming down, they must have known, wow.
Mm. Mm. So, I mean, sometimes you do know, and sometimes you don't. In actual fact, it's with the benefit of hindsight. You go, "Oh, right, okay, that really was hugely significant." Didn't seem like much at the time because when you're on the road, isn't it? You're just thinking, "Okay, well, we've got to get out of here. I've got to get some food. I've got to get some sleep. I've got to get I've got to get this back and get it on the air." And then you think, "Oh, wow." Actually, you look at the mechanics and not the significance of what just happened.
Yeah, I think that's right. But there are these rare occasions where you just think, wow, okay, the tectonic plates are shifting, and I can feel it. It's a privilege. It's a privilege.
Tectonic plates, great. That takes me to all those maps behind you. Plenty of those around there. See, we've got the ring of fire there over your left shoulder and all that. Your publisher's blurb and on the many brilliant books that you've written, your publisher's blurb, I suppose, overall says, without geography, we cannot understand the world. Tim Marshall is the man to unlock our understanding of the world. I mean, presumably you started with one book. Was that your first one? Was that Prisoners of Geography? And then you suddenly realised you were onto something.
But yes and no. My first book was Shadow Play, about the overthrow of Milosevic. Only came out, it came out in Yugoslavia. They did a few hundred prints for the UK, although then subsequently, 10 years later, I rewrote it and we published it in the UK. Second book, and you can bleep this if you want, I don't think you need to, was Dirty Northern Bastard.
Oh, yeah. I want to park that for a moment or two because I want to talk more about that. Because, I mean, it does dovetail. People think, oh, that's entirely separate, but it does. And it links in with what you said earlier about those coach trips to Ipswich and even
people think it's a book
at worse places.
Football chants, but not. Yeah, thank you.
In a moment, but
come back to it.
Give us the big ones, the big global ones.
Then I write this book. I leave Sky and I write this book, Prisoners of Geography. The premise being not that it's a prison that you can't do anything. It's just that everything that you do is within that prism, if you like, of geography. I'm not a geographic determinist. There are many, many factors made up that make up what happens and why it happens. But if you don't understand the geography of the situation you're dealing with, it's so much harder to then understand what is happening on that terrain. So I would look at the geography of that place, then the history that happened on that place. And a very good example is Russia and the North European plain being flat, narrowing when it gets to Poland, and then opening out again, flat land in front of Moscow. And so inevitably, the Russians will always seek to plug that narrow gap, which is called Poland, because that's how that's how Napoleon went there. That's how the Germans got there in 1914, and again in 1941, and many other, that narrowing gap in the North European plain. And so they will always seek to control it, to plug it. And if they can't, plan B is to have the buffer zone in front of them. If you don't know that geography, then the rationale of the Russian actions, which I am in no way defending, it's harder to understand it. So that's an example. And so then when you have that terrain, history, then the current affairs, it's a lot easier to understand them. Of course, you have to understand the politics and the demographics and the what minerals there are there. There's all sorts of stuff. But if you're missing that, and that's the idea of the Prisoners of Geography, and it hit a nerve because it sold quite well, and I think timing was I was lucky. It's a multipolar world, things are in flux, and I come up with something that gives you a framework for understanding, and so I get lucky with the timing.
Well, I said in my introduction, they are exactly that, a framework for understanding the retreat from globalization. Is that what's happening now globally? Did we see that in the kind of end of history era of the 90s, the early 2000s, globalization, no borders, citizens of everywhere? Are we in full retreat now?
No, we're not in full retreat, but it's certainly peaked. I'm glad you mentioned end of history. I'll try and come back to it and not rant too much. But you're right, globalization was bought completely by the managerial class, by which I mean political, economic, academia. They all bought into globalization and therefore missed the fact that globalization wasn't good for everybody. Now, I think globalization probably, on balance, lifted many boats, but it sank a few. It sank the steel industry in Pittsburgh, for example, in Pennsylvania. And so they missed that. The intellectual class completely, too many of them bought Francis Fukuyama's idea of the end of history, Communism has collapsed. There is only one route now forward for humanity. It is liberal democracy and open economy. Well, the idea that history stops is nonsense. He says he's misquoted. He isn't. He looked at 30 years of prosperity and peace, especially in Europe and communism. And I looked at 2,000 years of European history and thought that probably trumps the last 30 years. So, and I think what's going on now is partially a backlash against that. You are seeing people that feel left behind reacting. Globalization has also brought mass migration at a pace hitherto unseen, which societies find extremely difficult to get used to when it's at such rapid pace, hence the roiling of our politics, notably in Europe, but it's beginning here. Well, it's advancing here. And so one of my new sort of big thoughts, whether it's correct or not, I don't know, but it's a big thought, is that we're in a new era. We're not in the post-Cold War era anymore. We've moved to a new era. I just don't have a name for it yet.
Well, if any of our listeners and viewers can help with that,
it's the McDermott Marshall.
Do get in touch. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, let's coin that. Tim, I've got a specific question, which flows from that analysis and the books. I understand the geography, the physical geography. You say the rivers, the plains, the mountains, but how does that then apply to countries, particularly in post-colonial areas where effectively satraps and the rest of them have just drawn lines on a map with a ruler?
There's no way to talk about Mr. Blair. Gaza.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you may want to go there, but
we do in a moment or two. But overall, countries that really aren't formed by that history or geography.
Yeah, but geography. Yeah, I mean, some of the most stupid country borders you'll ever see are in Africa. If you look at Mali, it's like a 1,000-mile straight line. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Geography doesn't work that way. So what we bequeathed some of these countries was a ready-made recipe for violence. And I think some of the countries have done a pretty good job of saying, all right, there's 19 nations here because they told us we were one country, but let's see what we can do to build. I mean, there's a statute of limitations on when your responsibility starts to actually sort yourselves out, as well as falling back on our guilt, which we are guilty of as a society and culture. Not us, but our predecessors. Sorry, I'll come to the point. So when you look at somewhere like Mali, and we said to the Malians, you're all Malians now, get on with it. Well, the French did in this particular case. Well, the Tuareg live above, mostly, the river Niger, where Timbuktu is, and then above the Tuareg, much lighter skinned, very different culture, sometimes different languages. And you go south of Timbuktu, and you get into mostly black Africans, different culture. They've never got on. They didn't get on before the colonialists showed up. They're not particularly getting on now. But what colonialism did was say, you're all in one country. It's really not a good start. But you see, I'm using that as an example, and there are so many, as to point out how that geography is still resonant. Left completely to their own devices, by now there'd be two countries. I don't know, one north of Timbuktu and one south. I don't know, but we didn't help.
Tim, talking about geography and prisoners, and you touched on it there. Let's talk about Gaza. From your perspective, and I know you've been there, you reported from there, didn't you, in 2005, when there was, a pretty similar situation. Yeah. It's always different when the Israelis actually withdrew, and it was shortly after that Hamas came to power. Just give us your feel on that, the broad feel.
Well, again, Middle East in general was not helped by the lines we drew. Example, Iraq won a lot of people in the north, in broad brush strokes, the Kurds, Kurdish-speaking, Sunni. In the middle, majority Sunni Arab. In the south, majority Shia Arab. And nobody, until the Brits arrived, ever thought of this as one complete area. The Turks, the Ottomans, ruled it as 3 different vilayets. It never occurred to them this was one place. And then the Brits come up and say, right, you're all Iraqis. What? Get on with it. So it's another example. On Gaza, very few people want it. The Egyptians, when they occupied it, really didn't want to incorporate it.
When was that? Was that pre 67?
Yes, pre 48.
Right. Okay.
And up to they just weren't interested, and the Jordanians didn't want to annex the West Bank, and when they occupied it, there needs to be a Palestinian state. Otherwise, it will not stop. Now, it's possible it won't stop even if there is a Palestinian state. So it just depends who's in charge of it. But there has to be a Palestinian state, but it has to live in peace side by side and hopefully trade and all the rest of it with its Israeli neighbor. How the hell do we get there? And I've seen so many false dawns. One of the ways forward, let's say this is over, this current bit. Let's say there's a rebuilding. At that point, let's say the Saudis, I'm fast forwarding a year and a half, 2 years maybe. The Saudis bury the hatchet, recognize Israel, they start to trade like the UAE does, and Jordan and Egypt and many others. And the Saudis try to muscle the Qataris out of the way. The education system in Palestine, notably in Gaza, is overhauled, and all the stuff and the mosques are overhauled to stop teaching them to hate what is their enemy, but they're taught to hate them from a very early age. And if you can then build some form of civil society, then I think you could get the political class that will prepare to do the compromises. And that refers to the other side as well. The problem we still have is that on both sides you have extremists who, as you get close to peace, will do what they can to collapse it. But there are extremists on both sides that are maximalists. So it's a bit like many other issues. You either have total victory or you grow the middle ground and compromise.
Where do you see President Trump in all this then?
Trump is very much misunderstood by people that allow their utter loathing of him to cloud their judgment of what he can and can't do. I try to just remove any personal feelings I might have about his personality because it's not entirely relevant. And he knows what he's doing. If we did get a brief chance, because I know you're probably going to be running out of time soon, but to talk about MAGA and the MAGA worldview, it's a bigger subject than the one we're on now. But yeah, you're right. Term 1 did the Abraham Accords. Building on that, it looks, even during the Biden administration, that the Saudis might have joined up. October 7th obviously wrecked it. I think they will come back to the table. It's in both their interests and Israel's interests for them to have a proper relationship. So, at time of recording, he's got phase 1 over the line. No idea if phase 2, which is far, far more difficult because it involves disarmament by Hamas, no idea if it gets there. But we would not have got as far if it was not for him. And one of the proofs is when you looked at who showed up on the Wednesday, Ron Dermer shows up, Netanyahu's right-hand man. Nothing's getting agreed unless Dermer's in the room.
Right.
Witkoff shows up, his chief Middle East envoy. Kushner shows up, who's going to have a hand if it's ever reconstructed. Son-in-law of Trump. The Qatari prime minister, because Qatar partially bankrolls Hamas, shows up and is in the room. And then the head of intelligence of the Turkish intelligence agency shows up. And they're all in this room. And I look forward in a year's time to a very lengthy essay written in the New Yorker or wherever it comes out, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. Someone will say what happened in that room because I bet it was fascinating. But my suspicion is Kushner and Witkoff just looked everybody in the eye and they said, you're going to do this deal. You're going to do this deal. You're going to do this deal. And it takes the power and the perhaps ugly steel of Trumpism to get them over that line. Now, whether they get to phase 2, don't know, but I don't think it would have been done without Trump.
Fascinating. Tim, you're right. We are getting to the end of our line, but I promised we would talk about your book about Leeds United, Dirty Northern Bastards. I love saying that as well. See the emphasis I put on that.
You know what the back cover's called?
Go on then, swear some more.
Bastards.
Well, yeah, I count as one of them as an Arsenal supporter, which actually has some bearing on your love of Leeds United.
5-0, I was there.
Yeah. Listen, you beat us in the Centenary Cup final, broke my heart when I was about 12 years old in 1972. Yeah, absolutely robbed us. But
not true,
no, you were the better. You were
fake football.
You were the better team, but dirty old Don Revie and those those appalling kickers.
A recent game of ours. Johnny Giles was one of the best footballers that has ever graced God's earth. He was also one of the dirtiest. He was brilliant. Yeah. Look, Dirty Northern Bastards. I'm so happy that you actually got what it's really about. Yes, it's about football chants, but where does that chant come from? Dirty Northern Bastards. It comes from the Industrial Revolution and our view of the North. Hard, gritty, dirty, and you soft Southern. But I mean, it's not really true. There were the Kent miners, the London dockers. What, they're soft? I don't think so. But that soft Southern Bastards is rooted in our view of each other, the North and the South. And then I go on to some of the more problematic ones. When you go to Wales and you play Cardiff, you sing, "I should have built a wall and not a bridge." No, I don't really think that. I like the Severn Bridge. I like Wales, but it goes all the way back to Offa's Dyke. And it gives me an excuse in that book to then just slip in a couple of paragraphs about Offa's Dyke. And you move on to the funny stuff. Luis Suarez, your teeth are offside, which is teethist. Yeah, it's teethist. I'm afraid it is also funny. And then you go into the great history of the songs of there's the Bristol Rovers song that originates in the cotton fields of the deep American South in the 1880s. Yeah. Goodnight, Irene. They sing Goodnight, Irene. Telling the story of how it makes its way onto. So that's what of course, it's just a book about football chants, but I really enjoyed that.
Tim, we have to do a whole podcast on that. I'm absolutely fascinated by it, but I'm going to end it now. But I mean, we could go on for hours and hours.
Get us into trouble.
But I'm just going to say, from failed football chant initiator to brilliant global analyst, Tim Marshall, thank you for joining us on Legends of News.
Dermot, you're a legend. Thank you.